Welcome everyone. My name's John McDonnell. I'm a Member of Parliament and I'm also the Shadow Chancellor actually as well. Thanks for coming along. We're trying to raise the level of debate around economics in the country, just generally. And we've launched a whole series of lectures and seminars all around the country using a range of experts that we're drawing upon for policy advice. We've set up this Economic Policy Advisory Council with a number of, well, huge names on it, like Stiglitz, Koketi and all the others, Mariana Mazzucato. And we're trailing these poor people all around the country doing these lectures and seminars, and we're doing a few here as well. They're just open to everybody, so what's happening is a number of members of Parliament, members of the House of Lords, academics, students, and anyone off the street is coming along. The usual format is a lecture, then question and answer, or a panel in question and answer as well. Okay, tonight, and we usually go on for about an hour and a half, something like that. Tonight, this is about, the title is Technology and the Future World of Work. Our first speaker is Srnicek. And Nick's a political theorist with a PhD from the London School of Economics. He's the author of a number of books, the most recent being Inventing the Future, Post-Capitalism and a World Without Work, which is co-authored with Alex Williams. Okay, Nick.
So what I want to talk about today is basically just sort of set the scene for how has the sort of the labour market shifted within the UK over the past, say, 20 years. How is it likely to shift with this next wave of automation? And then what sort of the responses possibly could be. I think there's a number of ways in which the sort of new technologies that are coming on board could be taken in really terrible directions. And I think it's absolutely crucial that we be thinking about these issues right now in order to be headed in the right direction. So broadly speaking, over the past few decades, the UK, as I'm sure we're all aware, has shifted from being a manufacturing-based centre towards being more and more about services, particularly financial services. Largely speaking, manufacturing jobs, these have been ones which have been subject to automation and to the effects of offshoring and globalization. Now, along with this shift towards service jobs, we've also seen a hollowing out of middle-skilled jobs. Now, these are commonly jobs found in factories. They're middle-skilled jobs. They're also relatively well-paid jobs. They're not at the bottom level of the labor market. But what we've seen over the past 30 years or so is a polarization of the labor market. So we've seen an increase in low-skilled jobs and an increase in high-skilled jobs. So you can think about sort of rise of managers and professionals, which I believe Daniel will be talking about. But then also the rise of low-wage jobs. So things like care work, retail work, fast food work, all of this sort of stuff. So we've seen a polarization of the labor market over the past couple of decades. Now finally, we've also seen a shift away from routine work. Now routine work is any sort of job that can be very easily set out within a number of steps. These are also jobs that's very easy to automate, to get a machine to do. So largely when you look at the past waves of automation, what they've had to do is automate routine work. And non-routine jobs have been rising up ever since. You see this across the advanced economies, whether it be the UK or whether it be the US. Non-routine jobs are growing. Routine jobs, largely speaking, are stagnating. So these are the three trends we've seen over the past few decades. A shift towards service work, a polarization of the labor market, and a decrease in routine work. Now today we look around at the labor market, and it seems pretty good. It seems like we've got 5.1% unemployment, especially compared to Europe. This is quite good. The Eurozone is at 10.4% at the current moment. If we look at the participation rate in the UK labour market, it's at an all-time high of 74% right now. So if you look over at the US, participation rate in the labour market there has been dropping down. The UK has seen the exact opposite. Now it seems like we have a healthy labour market here. Now the problem is we have the quantity of jobs, we don't have the quality. So when we start to look at what exact sort of jobs are being created here we start to see problems. So first of all, there's been a significant decrease in the real earnings of people, particularly since the 2008 crisis. If we look at what sorts of jobs are being created, 2/3 of the net job creation since the crisis has been in self-employed work. So things like cab drivers, carpenters, builders, these sorts of things. Now, self-employed work is prone to lower wages, less stable work, and longer working hours. These are not good jobs that are being created. Now, if we look at something like 0 hours contracts, according to the ONS, it's a little bit hard to get exact data on this, but the ONS suggests that up to 5% of the working population in the UK is on a 0 hours contract. Likewise, we can see that in terms of underemployment, since 2001, more than 1 million people, an increase of 1 million people have said that they're underemployed now. They would like to be working more. So effectively what we see here is that in terms of wages, precarity, contract employment, flexible employment, the types of jobs that are being created today in plentiful numbers, they're just not good jobs. So this is the fundamental problem, I think, of the UK labour market right now. So this is where we stand. Now, what's likely to happen with automation? What is the future of work? Well, if we look at it, automation has always changed the labour market. So we think about the mechanization of agriculture, the shift towards manufacturing, which is at the heart of capitalism. We look at assembly line production and the shift towards more and more efficient manufacturing. And you would sort of say, well, if we look at the history, there doesn't seem to be that many problems. We've always had technology changing the labor market, and unemployment hasn't massively risen up. Now, I think this time is different, and this is why we need to be worried about it. So in the past, like I mentioned, routine work has been automated, things like factory jobs, most notably. But today, technology also threatens non-routine work. So a clear example of this, Google's self-driving car. Driving a car is an incredibly complicated task. The amount of information that you need to be able to do it, the sort of motor skills involved in driving a car are incredibly complicated. But we can do this now. We can automate this. We can have self-driving cars. So this is what the next wave of automation is going to do, is take away non-routine jobs, both manual labor and cognitive labor. So what does this mean? Well, a lot of the sort of residual jobs at the low-wage end of the labor market are non-routine manual jobs, or sort of non-routine cognitive jobs that are likely to be under threat from the next wave of automation. Now, potentially these people could all move to new jobs, but it doesn't seem likely given the sort of sluggish economic growth and the sluggish job growth globally, not just the UK, but globally. The ILO, International Labour Organization, suggests that we're, I believe it's 1 million people below trend line right now for employment. So this is a global problem. To think that the UK can fix it itself, I don't think is going to happen. So given that this is what's going to happen, automation, taking low-wage jobs, non-routine jobs, what are the sort of options that we face? Well, one is to continue down the path that the UK has been taking. So we can continue to make jobs worse, pay people less, and just continue to make people cheaper than machines. That's one way to sort of respond to the problem. We'll continue to have employment, but we'll have low productivity, we won't have much economic growth, and we'll continue to have worse and worse jobs for the average person. So that's one option, and if I were to bet, I would think that's the most likely option that the current UK government is going to take. I think the other option is that we fully accept the sort of potentials of automation and accept it into the economy. But now this means that we have to prepare our economies for it. So what does this mean? How do we prepare our economies and our societies for a world full of more automation? Well, I think there's 4 different ways that we can sort of respond to it. One is to really accept automation, and this means government investing in research towards automation, government providing subsidies for automation, and I think all of this is not only good in terms of sort of eliminating menial tasks, but it's also good for the sluggish productivity of the UK, which is a major problem right now. So investing in full automation. Now the second thing we could do is reduce the working week. So kicking it down from 40 hours to 35 hours or even 30 hours and really thinking about what this might mean. Now there's any number of pieces of evidence around reducing the working week, the benefits that come with it. So things like reducing stress, the sort of reducing the burdens on mental health. It also increases productivity. Most studies that look at it say that it increases productivity. So we can actually get more work with less hours. And there's also sort of ecological benefits as well from reducing the working week. So less energy use in the workplace, more time to spend at home with your family, with friends, doing whatever you would like. So those are the first two options: investing in full automation, reducing the working week. Now the third one is implementing or experimenting with a universal basic income. Now I assume most people here know what it is, but if you don't know, a universal basic income is the state provision of a basic minimum amount of money given to everybody in the country without any questions asked. So it's not means tested by any means. Now the idea behind a universal basic income is that it allows people to freely choose exactly what they would like to do with their lives. Do you want to go back to school and get a better education so you can get a higher skill job? Do you want to spend time taking care of your family? Do you want to go out and do creative activities? Or do you want to do volunteer work or political work that doesn't necessarily pay but benefits society? A universal basic income allows for all of this. And I think it's a key thing to really respond to the potential threat of automation. If we want to get rid of the terrible jobs that are being created, basic income is absolutely a crucial way to get there. Now, the fourth thing I think we need to do, and this will be my final point here, is that we have to sort of let go of the work ethic. I think we have become, as a society, too tied up with the idea that a job is an end in itself. I think we need to remember that a job is a means to something else. It's a means to living a free and fulfilling life. And this is absolutely something that we need to shift culturally in order to get to something like a post-work society and to respond to the problems that are coming up for the UK labour market. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
For the next 10 or 15 minutes, I'm going to talk to you about one particular part of the future, which is the future of the professions. So the future of doctors, teachers, nurses, accountants, and so on. And in the book, we set out two futures for the professions. And both of these rely upon technology. So the first future we say is reassuringly familiar. It's just a far more efficient version of what we have today. And in this model, professionals use technology to streamline and to optimize the traditional ways in which they've worked, largely since the middle of the 19th century. Just a more efficient version of what we've had in the past. And there's lots of examples of this. Doctors talking to patients via Skype, teachers using online material in the classroom, architects using computer-assisted design software to design bigger, taller, more complicated buildings. So that's the first future. But then there's a second future, which is a very different proposition. Here, what we call increasingly capable systems and machines, either operating alone or operating with people who look very unlike traditional professionals, will gradually displace more and more of the tasks that we tend to associate with traditional professionals. So for now and in the medium run, we expect these two futures to develop in parallel, but in the long run, we expect that second future to dominate, that we'll find new, more effective ways of sharing expertise in society, and our professions, our traditional professions, will be steadily dismantled. So that's where the research and the thinking in our book led us. But the thinking also led us to ask a more fundamental question, which is, why do we have the professions at all? And the answer, and it runs through a lot of our work, is that the professions, all of them, though they are different in lots of ways, are at the same time, in analogous ways, are a solution to the same problem, which is that nobody in society has sufficient specialist knowledge to cope with all the daily challenges in life. Nobody can know everything. All of us have limited understanding, and so we turn to doctors, we turn to teachers, we turn to nurses and accountants and management consultants and so on, because they have the expertise that we need to make progress in life. So in what we call a print-based industrial society, the professions are the way that we solve all of those daily challenges. Professionals have knowledge, they have experience, they have know-how, they have skills, and the term we use for that is they have practical expertise. They've got the ability to solve problems that those they help do not. Importantly, the professions operate under a grand bargain, which entitles them, often to the exclusion of other people, to provide certain services. So only doctors can prescribe certain types of medication, only architects can build certain types of buildings. In the US, only lawyers can provide legal advice, and so on. So they operate under a grand bargain. And they're asked, each of them to act as gatekeepers. Each profession is responsible for its own unique body of knowledge. So doctors look after medical knowledge, lawyers look after legal knowledge, teachers look after the knowledge of how to educate people, and so on. So that's the analysis of the professions and why we have them in this print-based industrial society. But we're no longer in a print-based industrial society. We're in what we call a technology-based internet society. And those traditional professions that I just described are creaking. They're unaffordable, in that most people, most organizations, simply don't have access to the expertise of first-rate professionals, or indeed any professionals. They're antiquated. Most professions rely upon tired ways of sharing knowledge and information despite the existence of feasible alternatives. The professions are incredibly opaque, and sometimes this is because the work that they do is genuinely too complicated for people to understand, but other times there's intentional obfuscation, and finally they underperform. The way in which we organize expertise in society, the expertise of the very best can only ever be enjoyed by privileged and lucky few. So we ask the question in the book, as we move from this print-based society to an internet society, might there be very different ways of organizing professional work? Might there be entirely new ways of solving the sorts of problems that traditionally traditional lawyers and doctors and teachers and so on have solved? And our answer is yes. So in the book, we've got hundreds of case studies, and just now I want to give you a flavor and just do a rapid tour through some of them. So in the legal world, for example, last year on eBay, 60 million disputes arose, and they were resolved online without any traditional lawyers using what's called an e-mediation platform. So bear in mind that 60 million disputes, that's 40 times the number of civil claims that are filed in the entire English and Welsh justice system on this one website in 1 year. Again, in the legal world, most recognized legal brand in the States isn't a traditional law firm, it's LegalZoom.com, an online document drafting system and legal advice platform. In education, more people signed up for Harvard's online courses in a single year than had attended the university in its entire existence up until that point. Khan Academy, online collection of practice problems and instructional videos, really good quality stuff. I use it to teach students economics and maths. It has 10 million unique users a month, which in a way is a higher effective attendance than the entire school population of England. In health, the WebMD network, online collection of health websites, extensive guidance on treatment and symptoms, it has 190 million unique users a month. Not all of them hypochondriacs, and that is a higher number than to all the doctors currently working in the US. Again, in the medical world, US Food and Drug Agency, by 2018, there'll be 1.5 billion people with at least one medical app on their smartphone. Some of you might have heard of IBM's Watson. In fact, who has heard of Watson? Raise your hand if you've heard of IBM's supercomputer Watson. Okay, for those who don't know, Watson is IBM's supercomputer, and its claim to fame is that in 2011 it went on Jeopardy, which is an American quiz show, about similar difficulty level to Mastermind here, and it beat the two best ever human Jeopardy champions, and this was in 2011. So this was a machine that could effectively answer a question on anything in the world better than the two leading human experts. So IBM, of course, didn't go into this to win quiz shows, and they started now, it's used in medicine to diagnose, to help make diagnosis and draw up treatment plans in cancer treatment and post-traumatic stress disorder. In journalism, Huffington Post on its 6th birthday had more unique visitors than the New York Times, which is 164 years old. Associated Press, 2014, started to use algorithms to computerize the production of earnings reports. So it was able, using these algorithms, to produce 15 times as many earnings reports than it was when it used traditional financial journalists alone. So when we began the book in 2010, our main preoccupation, as I said, was with the future of the professions, how technology is changing the professions. But as our thinking progressed, we realized, and you see all these cases, we realized that actually there was a more fundamental question that had to be addressed, which is, how is it that we produce and we share this practical expertise, this ability to solve all these problems in society? The traditional answer to this has been through the professions. When you have certain types of problems, you go to doctors. When you have certain types of problems, you go to lawyers, similarly accountants and consultants and so on. But that's in this print-based society. In an internet society, there are very, very different ways of producing and sharing this practical expertise. And in the book, we identify 6 alternative models, and I'm not going to go into them now, but there is a broader point from what I've just said, which is that most of the current commentary that we read about focuses on the impact of technology on work. And clearly it's important to ask ourselves what the consequences are for the providers of all this. But at the same time, that's only half the story. We've got to ask what are the consequences for the recipients, for the consumers, for patients, for students, for clients, for customers. And the story for them is optimistic. The argument in the book is that these technologies allow us to make this practical expertise far more widely available in society, a liberation of the sorts of stuff that used to just be locked up in the heads of human professionals or filed away in their filing cabinets. And it has to be right that when you think about technology, we think about the recipients as well. It's just not the case that the purpose of ill health is to provide a living for traditional doctors. The purpose of the law is to provide a living for traditional lawyers. The purpose of the professions is to resolve legal problems, to give affordable access to medical advice. And if we can find better, more efficient, more effective ways of making that expertise available in society, ways that don't necessarily rely upon the traditional approach, we should embrace those rather than reject them. So I want to just close with 2 questions for the Labour Party as it sets out thinking about the future. And the first question is this, which is to ask, is the mainstream Labour Party genuinely more interested in the future than it is in the past? Now, if you were to ask people in the Labour Party what area, for example, of transport policy excites them the most, I realise saying that maybe transport policy doesn't excite anyone, but if you were to ask, what area of the transport policy excites you the most, honestly, would people in the Labour Party tend to say nationalising the railways, or would they say driverless cars? What is the thing that gets people excited? Is it talking and debating about 20th century debates about 19th century technologies, or is it the sorts of things that are going to define the next few decades? So that's one. The second question is this, which is the Labour Party sufficiently open-minded about the future? So what I found in researching and writing this book were 2 very, very different mindsets in thinking about the future. One of them was very helpful and one of them was very unhelpful. So the unhelpful mindset that I found was to focus on process. To say that a given service, a given professional service, must be provided in a certain way. So you'll come across doctors who say the only way to provide medical advice is through a traditional doctor. The only way to provide legal advice is through a traditional lawyer. The only way to educate students is through a traditional teacher. So that was what I found was the unhelpful mindset. But the helpful mindset was to focus on outcomes. To be asking relentlessly for each of the outcomes that we care about, affordable access to healthcare, making sure people know what their legal entitlements are, making sure people get a good education, to ask relentlessly, what is the most effective way to achieve those outcomes, and to be open-minded about achieving them. So similarly, if I was to ask people in the Labour Party what's the most important thing to be done in the NHS, would people say stop privatisation, focusing on process, or would they say making sure that healthcare is as affordable and accessible to as many people in this country as possible, whatever process we necessarily need to go through to get there? So those are the 2 questions that I'd like to finish with, and I think came out through writing the book. So thank you very much.
I would like to go back to the main theme of our meeting today, which is the question of where we're going with this technology-driven transformation, and maybe to the task that governments are called to answer and society in general, that is our ability to shape the long-term direction of this technological change. Not only understand the implication, and this means having a broader conversation that goes beyond only technological trajectories and understanding the techno-economic paradigm we are living in, but really connecting technology and innovation policy on one side, the economic agenda, and the industrial policy. And why I say this is probably what I see lacking today, which is this broader conversation that brings these 3 things together. And why I say this is because in the prediction of where ICT would lead us, we're still waiting really for ICT or the technological revolution we see today, which is led by microprocessor and ICT that's pervading the whole economic sector. We are still waiting to enter the golden age of the knowledge society, which also goes with investment in green, new jobs, in the green revolution, in better job and well-being. So we are not seeing this at the moment. We are in economic stagnation, we see income polarization, wages are going down, and even the technological process, the rate of technological process is slowing down. And we do have problems to fix with this high-tech financialized system. So if we see, for instance, today with the technological revolution, we have excessive rate of return to capital. So a lot of wealth, which is made out in the digital economy, is actually, it's stock, let's say, overseas, in overseas account of high-tech companies. There is a lot of cash, and we see this also with the debate, with the settlement of the tax, of course, Google tax, that all this wealth which is made in the digital economy, it is not used to, to improve society, better services, and the kind of improvements that we want to see. And I want to discuss a little bit more in depth what we are seeing with this when we talk about this automation that is just at the beginning, or the full automation, or the really next wave of the Industrial Revolution. So if we see the combination of the Internet of Things, for example, which is really the convergence of the communication internet that we see today, so mobile communication with the TV and the telecom industry, the energy internet, so the smart meter, the energy grids, with logistic internet, so the RFID, the introduction of intelligent transport system, drones, and so on, which is really having a massive impact in the supply chain and changing the logistic globally. If we take the Internet of Things and then we see the transformation in manufacturing, so what the Germans call Industry 4.0, what it is the new cyber-physical system that are changing manufacturing, we could say, from manufacturing to maybe infofacturing, so distributed manufacturing, the equipment monitoring, the virtualization of factories. And of course, I mean, the self-service economy that we see, I mean, very well in the UK, like Tesco, as, 80% of retail is automated, has got self-service checks. And we see, for instance, payment, which has contactless, 20% of payment in retails. The robot economy is already a reality. Let's take the example of Foxconn, which is the biggest manufacturer in the world, employing 1 million people, and now they're introducing robots at 30. Oh my God. Okay.
Yeah, will do. Thank you.
God, this is spooky, isn't it? Okay.
Yeah. So so if we see the transformation in companies like Foxconn or Amazon, I mean, 30,000 robots per year are being introduced. Amazon has already 25,000 robots in their warehouses. Brian Arthur calls this the second economy, which means machine-to-machine robots will transact only with robots. And I mean, he's saying it will displace around 100 million workers globally. I think there is a kind of consensus. We can disagree on the magnitude of the automation, but there's a kind of consensus that this wave of automation will, of course, create job losses. I mean, technology can also create new industries and new opportunities for jobs that can be less automated, like creative jobs or care labor, or labor that rely on our ability to be together and that can be less automated by the machine more quickly. But I think it is clear that this is happening at a scale that we haven't seen it before. And we shouldn't underestimate as well the rise of the so-called on-demand economy, or the Uberization of services. I mean, it is really a big transformation. digitalization, we are seeing like classical service intermediaries being replaced with information intermediaries. So this is the mode of production of today, which is these platforms, which are basically huge digital platforms that can solve the question of supply and demand in a sense, because they create multi-sided marketplace. And if you control this huge multi-sided marketplace, you can also set the price, you can capture all the externalities that are created in these big marketplaces, and you can turn every asset on the platform, from your bedroom to the genome, in a productive asset. So every transaction in this marketplace has become an auction. And of course, auction reduces transaction cost and reduces cost, but it also reduces the cost of labor. So we're seeing the entire debate. I mean, with Uber, now we have Uber workers that are suing the company because they're considered independent contractors, while clearly there are employees, and all the costs of the companies are basically outsourced to the workers that have very low social protection. So there is no really safety net that are going together with this transformation of the sharing economy. And I think this is, has been already debated, this is a bigger trend we see in our economy with a wave of precarization of labor throughout. I'm from Italy. After the economic crisis, we have seen peaks of youth unemployment, over 40% in places like Italy, Spain, Portugal, and this creates a precarity trap. So this is not flexibility that is good for the workers, because basically you get no choices anymore, and you cannot exit precarity anymore. So all these talented workers that we have and that are very well educated and that could contribute to the economy, bringing wealth into the economy, are basically really cannot exit the precariousness of our existences. Then you get with a young generation that is not able to buy a house, to get access to the student loans, to have a mortgage, to make plan for the future. So I think it's really, we have to see it as an existential crisis of a condition of the new working generation. And I want to make a very important point about this digital economy. And the question is, who is really reaping the benefit of the digital dividend? So the World Economic Forum now in Davos is talking about $1 trillion of US dollars, which is created, value that can be created in this digital, in the new wave of the fourth industrial revolution from now till 2025. So in order, we need this wealth which is created in the economy, because we need to invest in, we need an expansionary policy, we need to reduce unemployment, we need to invest in future infrastructure, which is going to be, future infrastructure is going to be data-driven and technology-driven infrastructure. I like to call this Internet of Things infrastructure kind of data, like meta utilities, because the data layer, which is gonna be on top of the current energy infrastructure and transport infrastructure and even the welfare services like health, education, the data layer is going to be very important to be able to reshape the economy, to be able to reshape the way that we work, the ownership structures, and the possibility for new economic models and investments. And well, this cash basically that sits in the offshore accounts of big technology companies has to be mobilized to invest in social infrastructure for all. And this is the big task that we're having. And we're talking about very profitable companies. I mean, we've seen Google, Google Alphabet is considered the most valuable company on the planet. We see that Apple sits on $200 billion US dollars overseas that is potentially taxable. I mean, we see the sharing economy companies like Uber and Airbnb, which are evaluated 15 or 20 times more than revenue. So this cash, which usually goes anyways to executive pays or make their CEOs very, very rich, doesn't get invested in labor and doesn't get invested in the real economy. And this is the problem of the industrial policy that I was advocating at the very beginning. So really my final point here is First of all, the importance of these data-driven infrastructures. We do have to understand, so Silicon Valley model with data is that basically data can be turned into a commodity, into a new asset class that has to be traded in financial markets, right? This poses a lot of problems. There is Shoshana Zuboff from the Harvard Business School calls this surveillance capitalism because basically these are new surveillance assets, because in order to be able to trade this data, you have to monitor it 24-hour, the entire population. So these represent a big threat to our data protection and privacy and our ethical model. And so we need to shift from this surveillance capitalism that relied on the new data infrastructure to create a different model that can socialize data in order to invest in democratic innovation, to invest in technological innovation for the public and common good. And usually the talk is that, of course, you get the platform owner that can make a lot of money out of the digital economy, and then it will trickle down. I mean, in a sense, this company will be spontaneously operating for the public good. I do think that there is a lot of work to do there, and a lot of possible policies and alternatives that look at the power, instead of stopping the unstoppable and refusing this kind of sharing economy or digital transformation, which I don't think is the right thing to do. I think we have to embrace it and then see how we can transform this potential for the collective benefit, for how we can have a data-driven public transportation system, how we can have a new data-driven welfare system, which is at the end a question really of democracy, or beyond a question of economic and industrial policy. So the potential is to move away from this debate, either really resisting the technological transformation and maybe rioting against Uber. I mean, we've seen a lot of contestation across Europe, or being totally enthusiastic about digital disruption without thinking about the long-term implication and who is reaping the benefit of technological innovation. We have to open a space in between that is saying we can use the benefit of technology-driven transformation to mobilize collective intelligence of people for the citizens, because at the end, the future of society is not going to be built by digital platforms and robots, by citizens. So I think that's the task we have.